My name's Jackie, and I'm a senior designer at nDreams. nDreams are bringing out kind of a new relaunch of the assembly, and basically, you may have seen the sort of trailer and information last year, or you may have not, but it's all new and improved and fancy. And the assembly is a game, an adventure exploration game designed for VR, and you get to play as two different characters, one of whom, Madeline, doesn't really know what's going on, and the other of whom, Cal, he's an experienced member of this group, the Assembly. Now, the Assembly is a sort of secretive underground cabal of scientists, engineers, academics who want to be able to work without having to worry too much about the law or about restrictions. They're not all evil or anything like that. It's just sometimes, if you're trying to get something through, some testing through government, you might have to fill out a lot of forms and spend 10 years getting the requisite approval. And these people who just want to try and solve problems and seek out the truth for various situations without the waiting. And people are invited to join this group. It's not a kind of membership well known. You sign up and away you go. So Madeline is aware that the assembly exists, and she's now just been sort of brought in for her initiation, because they do have a layer or an element of cultishness about them. So they don't just say, hey, come on down, have an interview, oh, we don't like you. They're like, we've been watching you, let's see what you're actually like and how well you fit in with our goals, and get a feel for you as a person. And they put her in a lot of interesting and challenging situations to test her skill set, and also to see how she reacts in different ways. Whereas Cal's been with the Assembly for a while, and he's a virologist, he's pursuing his own sort of interests, but he's becoming a little bit disillusioned and uncertain if perhaps this secretive and perhaps law-breaking way of finding the truth is necessarily the best way to go. And his journey through the game is about him trying to decide what the best thing is for him to do with regards to the Assembly, whether he wants to stay with them, whether he wants to move on from them, whether he wants to reveal them to the world. And there's a particular incident that incites him that he is trying to address and deal with, and that has wider implications outside the world of the Assembly. So we've got Madeline and Cal, having two different characters means that you see the Assembly quite differently. There's practical differences for VR purposes, such as Madeline is a lot shorter, so when you're a player you get to experience the two different heights. And for me, because I'm about Madeline's height in real life, I feel like, oh yeah, this is a really good height. Whereas if you're a much taller person, then you sort of like, oh, I feel really small. And for me, playing Cal, who's a lot taller, that feels weird because I'm suddenly a lot closer to the top of a door than I am in real life. But you suddenly feel like you've grown. So there's practical sort of VR differences, the way that they breathe and move and talk, but also there's narrative differences. Because Madeline, the Assembly are trying to woo her whilst also test her. She's aware of their existence, sort of, it's rumoured about. She's had a little communication with them. She knows that they could be the only way that she gets to pursue everything she wants to pursue from a learning perspective, without having to go through all the hoops and all the rigmarole that perhaps academics and scientists sometimes have to do in the real world. And so she's a mix of kind of annoyed at the way the Assembly chooses to induct people, because it's not much fun being essentially almost kidnapped or hijacked and then sort of thrust into a lot of unusual situations. And her trials are a lot more unusual and exotic. Joel's tasks are a bit more focused around things that you would do in a laboratory or things that you would do in an office environment. He hasn't had these great set pieces created for him by the most unusual minds in the world, and so Madeline goes through some really unusual and visually spectacular sort of challenges and tests, and they challenge her both morally. She has to think a lot about what is the right thing to do, and we want the player to think, okay, is a group like this a good group to to exist? Is it a bad idea? What decisions would I make in this situation? You know, Madeline's given a lot of sort of moral dilemmas in which she has to choose a path, and neither us nor the Assembly is saying one is right and one is wrong, but we're trying to sort of let the player form their own conclusions. Whereas Cal's experience is very much one of somebody who's familiar with the Assembly. So while the player's playing as Madeline, they're like, oh, what's going on? This is all very curious. And then when they get to play as Cal, they're like, and they find out a lot of things behind the scenes. He's kind of the behind the scenes guy. So they learn a lot more about different things the Assembly are doing. They learn about other people who sort of are there in the Assembly, other characters. And they also learn, what's the difference between what the Assembly are saying to Madeline versus what he experiences. And he's obviously been much more hands-on, so he's got his own idea about whether what they're doing is the best thing or not, certainly relating to his course of study and how it might impact the wider world and so on and so forth. When we started working with the Assembly, we wanted to have a narrative, a really strong narrative, because we believed that adventure games were great for VR, especially in the early stages of VR. It allows people to take their time to explore. Half the fun of VR is just looking around going, wow, this is amazing, and the Assembly has that in spades. But weaving around that, we wanted to have a really engaging narrative. And nDreams as a company, we've done some things like Z, kind of for PlayStation Home, a really immersive, interactive, event, story-driven experience. So we felt that things like that have given us a good basis from which to work upon. And although Gunner had a light narrative, and Perfect Beach not so much so, but we felt that it was crucial for this, especially as playing as two different characters, that you got to know the characters, you got to understand about the situation, and also the Assembly is a kind of exciting place. As a person in the real world, if I was like, oh, there's a secret group of people doing secret experiments, I'd really want to know more about that. So we tried to make sure that the narrative, as well as focusing on the main storyline of Madeline and Cal, it also honed in and gave people a chance to learn about other bits of the Assembly, other things that they're doing, and interesting little fun things or crazy things or sinister things. And I think that it means that when players play through the game, they'll both get to experience the kind of main plot narrative, which is quite sweeping and dramatic in some of the twists and turns it takes. And also, if they love exploring, if they want to look in a drawer, they can be like, oh look, there's a little dictaphone here. What's this got on it? And have a little listen to some background things, or they can look around an office and read a bit of paper that has some notes about an experiment that's going on, or they can have a look around and see an experiment that's going on right now and interfere with it if they want to. So there's lots of other little narrative strands they can engage with if they choose to. When we were trying to work out what sort of VR angles to leverage in the game, we did a lot of experimentation to try and decide what worked best, and we had lots of fun trying out different visual effects. For example, when Madeline's on the gurney and she's sort of coming round or going under, in and out of consciousness, there's sort of a blurring and a fading that we kind of do some experiments with, because obviously we want to make sure that people are comfortable with that, but it really does convey what's happening to you. We also, there's a lot of interesting considerations with VR that you don't tend to consider with a regular first person on a screen title, such as what happens if someone goes up to a wall and then the positional tracking, they're like, oh, I'm just going to put my head through the wall. Obviously in a game, if they did that, they'd just see the nothingness that was outside the geometry that's been built. So things like putting in a fading for that, and also if you're on the gurney, if you turn your head too far, in real life you couldn't turn your neck 360, and also because you're strapped down, we kind of want to give the player that feeling of I can only look so far, so we put in a fade that occurs if you start trying to, if you're on a rotating chair, for example, you're like, I'm going to spin round, we're trying to say no, you're on a gurney, you're strapped down, we want to give you the feeling of that. And then there's lots of other different bits and pieces we've sort of fun, interesting, challenging things throughout the game that we've put in to make a really interesting and engaging VR experience. For example, we had an idea of wanting to put a microscope in there because there's lots of laboratories and it makes sense that they'd use microscopes. And we tried out some different things. First of all, just having a very sort of overlaid effect, which is just like you sort of lean in and then it's sort of very much in your face as if you were just looking at a slide. But we found that it actually became much more immersive if we made this interesting 3D environment that's kind of like you're almost projected into a 3D space, and we might, you know, the assembly is only a little bit in the future, but we think it's enough in the future that they would have some very, you know, interesting visualization techniques, and that's really fun to use in VR. And we also, things like night vision goggles, you know, which that green effect that you see on the TV shows, it's like, oh, that would be kind of sort of cool to actually experience it, because when it's on a screen, you know, real life is still all around it, and if you move your head slightly, you're not playing first person through night vision, you're, you know, staring at a chair or the wall. But in VR, you turn your head, the night vision turns with you, and it's such a different feeling. It's such an immersive feeling, and you know, backed up by all the audio, which is really important, that really adds to the immersion of all these elements. I think we just really wanted to make sure that we were making the best use that we could, and also encouraging people to look around, because if you've seen people play VR for the first time, they tend to keep their head very still until you know, and so we're trying to encourage people by giving them on the initial gurney journey, for example, that things to look at, sort of trying to, you know, catch their attention with, oh, there's someone moving in that room, or oh, if I look down in the lift I can see right down into the shaft, you know, lean forward a little bit, or oh, there's an experiment over there, I should turn my head and there's somebody just around the corner, I should look at them. Trying to encourage people to get used to looking around. And you know, later in the game there's lots of points where you can look up or look down, and you know, we've got a little bit of height and vertigo in some of the, not deliberately vertigo, but you know what I mean, that feeling of when you're high up and you're looking down, because that's something in VR that works really, really well, really convincingly. We are planning on getting the assembly out at launch of each of the iterations of the hardware. That is our goal. I can't swear 100% that will definitely happen. I mean, we're currently on track, but you know, we're obviously trying to make the best experience and best game we possibly can. And I think if we found that, you know, a bit of extra time would ensure that, we wouldn't be averse to that. But at the moment, we're definitely hoping to hit the launch date so that we can come out when the hardware's out day one. We're there, like play our game. It's going to be great.